Have you ever felt a profound, almost magnetic pull towards ancient sacred places? I'm not just talking about, crumbling pyramids or old cathedrals, but something deeper,
Mm.
maybe glimpsed in dreams or felt during moments of quiet, intense contemplation. What if there were hidden sanctuaries that aren't made of stone or brick, but woven from something far more subtle and, well, profoundly alive? Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a really captivating concept, astral temples. We'll be exploring these non-physical sanctuaries that spiritual traditions across the globe have talked about for millennia. It's kind of a journey into the architecture of consciousness itself.
Yeah, and our deep dive today is mainly drawing from some compelling excerpts of astral temples, sanctuaries of consciousness and intertransformation. But this isn't just about, reading a text. It's more about peeling back the layers to really try and understand these elusive yet profoundly significant spaces that seem to transcend our ordinary reality.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this then. Our mission, really, is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from these sources. We want to give you a shortcut, basically, to being well-informed about what these astral temples are, their history, and maybe what they might mean for us today. We're hunting for those surprising facts, those aha moments, but without drowning in information. So as we get started, the first step is really grasping what these astral temples are, according to our sources. They describe them not as like mere figments of imagination or just poetry, but as actual structured spaces of consciousness.
Right.
Existing on what many traditions call the astral plane, you can think of it as a non-physical dimension, sometimes called the dream plane, or the realm where thoughts and emotions become more tangible, more energetic. It's where spirit and energy kind of interweave freely.
And what makes these temples really unique, according to the sources, is how dynamic they are. They're not static like a physical building. They're described as living blueprints, flexible, intelligent, and incredibly responsive to the awareness of the person who enters.
Responsive, wow.
Yes. And the sources even suggest they might be the original archetypal models, the templates from which all sacred architecture on Earth, think the Temple of Solomon, the Great Pyramid, even Tibetan mandalas were copied.
Copy it. So the astral version came first.
That's the idea presented, yeah. Imagine a building that actually evolves with your spiritual growth. It's a pretty profound concept.
Definitely. And these aren't just like theories from old books. Historically, people access these places through specific ways. Dreams, deep meditation, trance states, intricate ritual work. What's really striking is how universal it seems. These accounts pop up in vastly different traditions around the world, often with descriptions that are remarkably similar.
Absolutely. If you look at the cross-cultural evidence, you see traditions from places like, well, mythic Atlantis, ancient Egypt, Tibet, numerous indigenous cultures. They all seem to reference this spiritual architecture beyond the material world.
Yeah.
You have, for instance, Hermetic magicians describing entering inner sanctums quite meticulously. Sufi mystics wrote about luminous palaces you could access through practice. Kabbalists talked about palaces of light and higher worlds. And indigenous shamans, well, they've long described entering sacred lodges beyond time, often to connect with ancestors.
And here's where it gets really interesting. As we dug into the sources, it became clear these weren't just passive visions. They were described as active spaces where real transformation actually happened. We're talking healing, initiation into deeper knowledge, divine encounters, profound revelations.
That's a key point.
And what's incredibly consistent is how they seem to appear spontaneously during spiritual awakenings. People report seeing domes of light, crystalline halls, temples surrounded by energy fields or sacred geometry. And often there's this unmistakable deep feeling of coming home.
Yes, like tapping into some ancient memory. The sources talk about this mythic blueprint. It's a fascinating idea suggesting these weren't just designed by humans, but maybe dreamed into being by ancient minds in deep connection with the divine. It implies this foundational archetypal design that exists before physical creation, almost like the spiritual template for sacred spaces. In the mystery schools of, say, Atlantis and Lemuria, these temples were apparently seen as the true spiritual centers of power, maybe even more real than physical structures.
More real and physical.
And this mythic blueprint idea, it connects beautifully with things like ancient Egypt's House of Life. That wasn't just a temple. It was like a spiritual academy for inner journeys, right?
Yeah.
Aligning with divine principles. The Mayans had their dream temples for seers. Even Vedic texts describe celestial cities and vibrational realms. It all reinforces this idea of them being structured, purposeful spaces for spiritual evolution, designed for growth.
And the descriptions. The consistency is amazing despite the different cultures. Common patterns emerge. Crystalline towers, radiant domes, inner sanctums, flooded with light, golden halls where sound and light are like the building blocks.
Exactly. It points towards this significance of sacred order, symmetry, and energy flow. It really suggests a universal blueprint within consciousness itself. Even something like a shaman's lodge or sky palace, reached through trance, is often described as filled with ancestral presence, echoing these same principles of divine proportion and energy.
Right. So it suggests an underlying cosmic harmony reflected in these inner spaces. Okay, so if these places are so profound, what do the sources actually say about accessing them? How does one get there? It seems clear it wasn't accidental. It was described as a deliberate, sacred practice requiring deep inner preparation. This included apparently strict mental, emotional, and energetic training. It wasn't about escape, more about refining your inner senses.
Precisely. And the methods used were varied, but always purposeful. Things like specific breath work, sometimes fasting, using sound vibrations, symbolic rituals, and in some traditions, careful ceremonial use of sacred plants. For example, Hermetic magicians would purify themselves, chant specific names, visualize symbols, almost like energetic keys. Tibetan monks practiced dream yoga, training the mind to stay conscious in dreams to navigate these planes deliberately.
Dream yoga. Fascinating.
And Sufi mystics sought the inner Kaaba through breath and movement. Indigenous shamans used drumming, chanting, sometimes plant medicine, to journey to these spirit lodges for guidance. But underlying all of it was the crucial role of inner purity and intention. The sources are pretty clear that emotional clutter, selfish intention, or uncontrolled fear could distort the temple or even block the entrance entirely.
Like the temple itself is discerning.
That's the implication, yes.
That makes a lot of sense, especially thinking about those symbolic doorways mentioned sigils, mandalas, sacred geometries, vibrational keys like chants. It suggests they aren't just decoration, they're navigational tools, maybe aligning the mind to specific frequencies.
That seems to be the idea.
And here's another interesting bit. Learning inside these temples apparently happened not through words, but through direct inner experience, leading to this profound embodiment of knowledge, a new clarity when you returned.
Yes, experiential learning at its deepest level.
And it's not just ancient history either, right? What's compelling is how people throughout history, even recently, report similar encounters, often without knowing about these traditions beforehand. You mentioned 20th century figures like Dion Fortune describing temples of inner light, Helena Blavatsky talking about sanctuaries in the higher planes, Edgar Cayce, too, with his visions of Atlantean temples of healing and wisdom.
Exactly. And modern seekers, too, report strikingly similar things from altered states or deep meditation. You hear about golden halls, vast libraries of glowing scrolls, crystalline structures that respond to thought, serene places with guides. And what's almost always there is that emotional response. Awe, peace, recognition, and that deep sense of homecoming.
Homecoming,
Yeah.
yeah. It suggests something fundamental is being touched.
And what's really fascinating is this idea of the living intelligence of the temple. It's described as shifting, reshaping, based on the traveler's growth, like it's interacting with you. There are even accounts of protective restrictions, where someone might be gently turned away if their intention isn't clear or they're too internally chaotic.
So what does that mean for a space to be intelligent and protective?
Well, the sources suggest it implies a kind of symbiotic relationship. The temple acts almost like a wise guide, adapting to help you grow, but also safeguarding the space, maybe turning people away gently if they aren't quite ready or aligned.
That really pushes how we think about space, doesn't it? If we look at it psychologically. You could connect it to Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious, right? This shared inner realm of archetypes and symbols. Maybe these temples are accessed through that shared spiritual architecture, living under the surface.
It's a very strong parallel.
Yeah.
Some psychologists, drawing from Jung, might see the temple as representing the inner self, or that process of individuation becoming whole. Mystics, on the other hand, often describe it as a real dimensional place.
Or maybe it's both.
Perhaps it is both, a profound inner landscape that also exists as a shared, sort of objective spiritual reality. Either way, the symbolism inside seems to activate dormant parts of the psyche, allowing for deep healing, integration, even those experiences people describe as downloads of information.
And it's interesting how many people say they didn't create the temple, they discovered it or felt invited in. That really challenges the idea that it's just, a dream or imagination. It points more towards a metaphysical infrastructure, an interdimensional space that's both personal and universal.
Yeah, not just a construct of the ego, but maybe a landscape of the soul itself.
Yeah.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? In an age where the outer world can feel chaotic, disconnected, maybe even disenchanted for many, more people seem to be turning inward. And what they're finding, sometimes surprisingly, isn't emptiness. It's a temple waiting, luminous, familiar, and alive.
Hmm. That's powerful. A testament to an innate spiritual longing, perhaps. So the sources frame these temples as spaces of remembrance, reconnection, and realignment.
Yeah.
It's like when people enter them, they aren't escaping reality, they're recovering a deeper layer of it, touching base with something fundamental.
Exactly. Plugging back into a core source, you could say. And their ancient function, initiation, healing, prophecy, awakening parts of the soul that seems to hold true today. Maybe even more so when we feel buried under layers of stress and, modern life.
These temples offer a path back to wholeness, then.
That's the potential they seem to represent.
And it's beautiful how the temple itself is described as a living teacher, adapting, communicating not with words, but through silence, light, and symbol.
An interactive learning space for the soul, yes. And there's this idea of collective resonance, too. The sources hint that when people visit these spaces, work within them, it strengthens the field itself, like individual lights adding to a larger illumination. The shared visions might suggest, as the sources put it, that the mystery schools are returning, not as secret physical orders, but as invisible sanctuaries of the spirit, accessible to anyone who truly seeks.
Wow. Okay, so we've really unpacked quite a bit about these incredible spaces. They're clearly not just myths or, fringe ideas, but consistent, apparently accessible inner reality seen across cultures and time, hinting at this shared architecture of consciousness.
Which brings up an important question for you, listening. What does knowing this mean for your own sense of reconnection? Maybe your purpose? The sources definitely suggest these spaces offer a profound opportunity for insight, for alignment, especially when the world feels, disconnected.
And if you do feel a pull towards this, the sources offer some practical starting points. Things like keeping a dream journal, meditating with a clear intention, really learning to listen to your inner symbols, your intuition, and importantly, trusting the process as it unfolds.
And the sources leave us with a really powerful, resonant thought to consider. The temple is not found, it is remembered. What if the deep truths, the guidance you might be seeking, aren't out there to be discovered, but actually already within you, just waiting to be recalled? It frames the journey not as venturing out, but as returning home. Returning to a truth that perhaps never really left. An invitation, maybe, to step through that inner gate and begin again.